Physics at the Mona campus, and I will moderate this afternoon's proceedings. Globally, electric vehicle uptake is on the rise, propelled by declining battery costs, increased awareness, and favorable government policies. EVs are also attracting interest for their role in reducing carbon emissions and local air pollution, in fostering energy conservation and efficiency in the energy sector and the transport sector, and in eliminating high fuel costs. Locally, we see a number of initiatives around electric vehicles. And this afternoon, we want to highlight 4 of these as the context for our discussion. So on May 7, we saw the commissioning of a public electric vehicle charging facility at the Boost service station in Drax Hall, St. Anne. The unit was installed by the Jamaica Public Service Company Limited and forms part of an island-wide program to roll out 10 charging units over the next 2 months. An electric vehicle council was established to give oversight and review any policies, legislations, and regulations related to the deployment of EVs in Jamaica, and to provide comment on matters relating to safety and suitability of EV technologies locally. This council had their first meeting on May 14 and approved the eMobility strategic framework. Also on May 14, we heard that Evergo Jamaica launched at Richmond Estates, where its first level 2 or fast charging station was unveiled. Evergo Jamaica Limited is investing roughly 150 million in the rollout of 60 electric vehicle charging stations across Jamaica by year end. And then on June 7, the Office of Utilities Regulation, OUR, invited comments on its stakeholder consultation document regarding electric vehicles, titled Proposals for a Regulatory Framework to Facilitate the Penetration of Electric Vehicles in Jamaica. So already we see the public and private sector at work for this EV penetration within Jamaica. To wrap up our initial comments, we want to know that the University of the West Indies is also taking steps to contribute to the EV initiatives in the Caribbean and here in Jamaica. At the Mona campus, through the faculties of Engineering, Science and Technology and Social Sciences, and the Estate Management Department and other key stakeholders, all these form part of a submission through the Government of Jamaica United Nations Development Program. They made a submission to conduct a pilot study on the Mona campus. If approved, this project will seek to demonstrate high potential EVs and supportive infrastructure and systems, and analyze conditions for suitable operations of EVs, among other objectives. At the undergraduate level, students in the Faculty of Engineering have explored comparisons between the traditional internal combustion engine vehicles and EVs for different model sizes and have assessed the current use of EVs in Jamaica as part of undergraduate projects. And finally, I would note that in terms of workforce development, which we would have to consider under EVs, the Department of Physics in the Faculty of Science and Technology offers a major in electronics and a BSc in Electronics and Alternative Energy Systems, and the Faculty of Engineering offers a BSc in Electronics Engineering. And already discussions are underway to ascertain how UA programs can support the sustainability of EV initiatives in Jamaica and the region, and what research the UA can undertake for a region to better appreciate the implications of EV penetrations in our local context. So therefore, one of the things we hope that will emerge from this forum is that continued willingness of the UWI to partner and to support. Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon, we have an outstanding panel of experts to help us better understand electric vehicles, to examine policy initiatives in training to support EV rollout, to scope some of the major players required for EV uptake, and some of the initiatives to provide infrastructure to support, as well as training opportunities. We welcome your participation. Please post comments and questions in the chat. For questions, please indicate the panelists to whom the question is directed. And finally, if you have had any experience driving an EV, let us know about it in the chat. Nothing beats our own experience. So let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to acknowledge our presenters this afternoon. We are joined by Ms. Charlin Bodley, Project Development and Gender Expert, Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, CCRE. We have Dr. Zahra Oliphant, Acting Director, Corporate Planning and Performance Management, Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. And we have Mr. Richard Gordon, Manager, Renewable Energy Systems, Jamaica Public Service Company Limited. We will also have as part of our panel discussion, Mr. Ian Levy, Acting Manager, Jamaica German Automated School, and Mr. Clinton Henry, Program Coordinator, Jamaica German Automated School. We will not be joined this afternoon by Mr. McKenzie, who could not join the forum. So let's get started, ladies and gentlemen, with an introduction to e-mobility. Our presenter, Ms. Charlin Bodley, is CCRE's Sustainable Energy and Project Development Expert. Having served as an energy specialist in her island home of St. Lucia, Ms. Bodley further supported the Caribbean region as a consultant in the area of sustainable energy. Ms. Bodley holds a Master of Engineering degree in Energy and Environmental Management from the University of Flensburg, Germany, a postgraduate diploma in geothermal project management and financing from the United Nations Geothermal Training Program in Iceland, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Energy and Environmental Engineering out of Mexico. Ms. Bodley is a former manager, program manager for the Clinton Climate Initiative and Carlin-owned Women in Renewable Energy Wire Network. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Bodley.
Pleasant good afternoon, and thanks for that introduction. It is indeed a pleasure to be here with you today, representing the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, affectionately known as the CCRE. And the CCRE is a CARICOM institution with the main responsibility for the implementation of sustainable energy in the Caribbean. And so today, because the CCRE has, as one of its 7 strategic program areas, a keen focus on sustainable transport, I am very happy to deliver some brief remarks on as an introduction to e-mobility. I felt it necessary to look at where we're at in the Caribbean, and you would notice that I have Jamaica highlighted in red. What is our transport situation? What is essentially driving a transition to e-mobility within the Caribbean? If we look at these numbers, I think they speak volumes. And so across CARICOM, we have an average of roughly 39 to 40% of all energy consumption coming from the transport sector. And that is a significant energy consumption in relation to our other sectors, including our electricity sectors. And therefore, so we see Jamaica against that average being 42, right about very close to the average of 39, 40. And that means that our region faces high dependence on fossil fuels. And so in relation to the transport sector, fossil imports accounts for roughly 10% of GDP across CARICOM member states. Now that means that the transport sector is a significant contributor to economic development and is increasingly linked with the energy sector. So we don't work in silos. And the way we are moving globally doesn't allow us to single out the transport sector. While it may not be a panacea as we seek to transition our energy sector, it surely is such a big part. And therefore, we face an era of disruption, as we call it, that has been ignited by emerging transport technologies. We heard in the introduction that globally, over the last few decades, we've seen significant technological advancement in the area of electric mobility. And that has also fueled changing requirements from our stakeholders across our region. And therefore, what is eMobility? Now, I think when we hear eMobility, the very first thing that comes to mind is powertrain technologies. What is an electric vehicle? It's a vehicle that moves with electricity as opposed to our conventional internal combustion engines. However, eMobility is so much more than just the technology, although I must admit, the technology is a huge part of eMobility. And so I'll start by saying, having set that context of where we're at in terms of the transport sector in our region, in Jamaica, eMobility is surely a viable solution. And it really is a concept of using electric powertrain technologies. But not only that, it also encompasses in-vehicle information and communication technologies, connected infrastructure that enable these electric vehicles and fleets to operate. And so I wanted to mention that apart from the technology, which is essential and a centerpiece, connectivity and electrification also form a great big part of eMobility. And I'll go one step further to add one more layer or one category, and that is transport demand management. But before I do, electrification, I think, is perhaps the simplest one to tie into eMobility as we understand it. So essentially, the integration of mobility into the electricity sector, and that's why I mentioned earlier, it's quite difficult to work in a silo or to set apart the technology without looking at the entire system as being eMobility. So that integration of mobility into electricity sectors, and that's be it our conventional electricity grid with our current energy mixes or our projected and intended renewable energy dominated national grids. And that happens through, again, the deployment of digital technologies. But of importance to electrification is the interaction among policy instruments, political economies, and these can tend to be very complex. Electricity production, energy mixes, so to include renewable energy, market dynamics, supply chains, among others. Now, can we look at eMobility without looking at connectivity and digitalization? And I'm really pleased by the efforts of our universities in the region to tackle this topic. Electrifying our transport sector will require us to also enhance connectivity and digitalization to enable the interactions that are necessary within vehicles, between vehicles and infrastructure, and even vehicles to grid, vehicles to homes, vehicles to other buildings. And that is collectively now called as V2X, and X being anything that your vehicle, your electric vehicle can interact with. As well as, of course, the connectivity across transportation networks. And the third layer, which is important for us to consider as eMobility, would be transport demand management. And why is that so? As we look to transition, we think about electrifying our public fleets, we think about electrifying corporate fleets, our privately owned vehicles. There needs to be a redistribution, and that will happen naturally. And so we have to prepare for it. And we have to ensure that that happens in a manner that is effective. And so we should have aims to reduce and redistribute our transport demand in space and time through the application of policies and strategies, which we will hear about in subsequent presentations. And all that to achieve our desired mobility revolution. And so to focus a little on the technology side of things, and I think this is one area I imagine would excite our students at UE and other universities, powertrain technologies really refer to collectively what we call electric vehicles. And when we think of EVs, I'm sure a Nissan Leaf first comes to mind as a fully electric vehicle. But there are various classes. Without going into too much detail as an introduction, I will focus on a fully electric vehicle, which essentially consists of an electric motor, sometimes more than one, and therefore energy is supplied from rechargeable batteries. And so that vehicle, which you would see on the very right of my screen, is void of an internal combustion engine and would have to be charged so that you have that supply of energy to your batteries. And then you have that flow of energy from your batteries to your electric motors, which allows your vehicle to move and function as a vehicle. And then on the, what we say is the more secure side, the safer side, we have hybrid vehicles. And we have two main types. We have our conventional or traditional hybrid electric vehicles. So what I have on screen as HEV, and that consists both of your ICE, your internal combustion engine, your electric motor, a very small battery. And of course, you have regenerative braking, by the way, across all three types of technologies, which means that as you brake through driving, that your batteries are replenished to a certain point. Now, your HEV, through your batteries, and all the power from the batteries essentially coming from your gasoline, your conventional fluid. So you would notice that absent from that diagram for the HEV is any indication of charging, because in the HEVs there is no plug-in charging. So that battery will allow us, and you can have a look while I speak, at your gas range and your combined range of these three technologies. And so that charged battery could allow you, particularly when you just start your vehicle, give you a range of 1 to 2 miles, especially if you're driving at a certain speed level, and then your ICE will kick in. The main difference between that and the PHEV would be the fact that it allows for plug-in. So your battery, while it is recharged through regenerative braking and also through gasoline, you can plug in that battery to recharge. And so we see that range, and that, I'm sure, one thing that frequently comes to mind when we speak of electric vehicles is range anxiety. And it's clear that with a fully electric vehicle, there are some differences in your range. So right now with our 2021 Nissan Leaf, I believe we're somewhere at a range of 26 miles. That translates, I believe, to roughly 350 kilometers. Quite an advancement from the very first Nissan Leafs that would have entered the market. And so I want to really impress upon you that eMobility goes way beyond what we've just seen, our powertrain technologies. eMobility is the entire system. It's the economic considerations. What are the upfront costs? And that leads us to thinking about, how do we weigh an electric vehicle versus a conventional ICE vehicle? The upfront costs, are they too high to make it competitive? Cost savings in a corporate world, a company, transitioning its fleet from the conventional ICE vehicles to electric vehicles, what are the cost savings? On the flip side, what are the opportunity costs to not transitioning to eMobility? But mostly I want to mention what I have on screen as TCO, the total cost of ownership. And so while we look at the economics associated with an electric vehicle, it is important not to just compare upfront costs, but to look at the total cost of ownership. Also important is the aspect of connected networks. I already mentioned the ability of an electric vehicle to be connected to other vehicles, connected to your grid, so V2V, vehicle to vehicle, V2G, vehicle to grid, V2H, vehicle to home, V2B, vehicle to building, and collectively we can say V2X, because really when we think of this absolutely great machine, it can connect to so many other devices and infrastructure. And in fact, it's quite important to look at electric mobility within the utility side of things. I know we were to have a conversation on stakeholders, and the utility being a very key stakeholder in our process of transitioning the transport sector. In fact, collectively, electric vehicles can mimic a short, quick responding generator. And technologically, that is a huge deal, because it means that your electric vehicles, once it is incorporated into your transport and electricity sectors in the right way, it can provide ancillary services and can even assist utilities in managing the grid, can achieve grid stability, can act as storage devices. I mean, I'm sure I could list so much more that can happen in terms of that connection to our electricity grids. And then there is adaptation of services and supply chains. What happens to the battery after its useful life, as we know it, for the use in an electric vehicle? In fact, batteries have been known, and one key advantage is the fact that they can provide storage, they can serve as storage devices for our homes. There's also, you could have services coming out of that, battery swapping services. I already mentioned repurposing. And of key importance is after sales service. Who maintains that vehicle? Who insures that vehicle? If there is an accident, who responds? And lastly, I think the obvious layer to eMobility, and perhaps the most spoken about, is its benefits in terms of environment and in terms of reducing air pollution, also its positive effect on our health. And as a country, and as a region, what really is our motivation for eMobility transition? I think prime areas of interventions seek to address the following, including mitigation of GHG emissions, and Jamaica, like other Caribbean islands and countries, have submitted its commitments to the Paris Agreement. NDCs have been set in our member states, and of course, on a national level, we have commitments. I'm so happy to hear at the introduction of the framework developed in Jamaica for electric mobility. Energy security and dependence on imported fossil fuels, and that's part of a huge movement to transition the sector in general. Jamaica, from our last report at the C3, is at 16% of penetration of renewable energy, and even renewable energy in terms of eMobility would be important. Transport efficiency, market demands for lower operation cost, and I think it's difficult not to bring in the COVID discussion into this, because our post-COVID recovery will really require us as Caribbean people to be innovative and to really push to lower our operational costs in a number of sectors. And so transport, that shift to eMobility can surely be a contributor. And then we have health, as I mentioned, and in general, quality of life improvement of Jamaicans and Caribbean people. Corporate fuel efficiency, and I mentioned the assistance to utilities or grid operators to maintain grid stability by optimizing charging for demand response. And also you may have the layer of increased demand sales. And what happens if we don't? Well, we remain susceptible to the vagaries of the international oil market. And I candidly state that we really run the risk of becoming a dumping ground for ICE vehicles, in particular used vehicles, especially as producer countries accelerate their own transition to eMobility. with these ICE vehicles that would have already been introduced to the market, we would be the receivers of it if we do not tap into that transition in a catalytic way. Continued and exacerbated inefficiencies in our transport systems, missed opportunities to benefit from increased resilience. So I mentioned an electric vehicle being able to be a storage device. Our hurricane seasons increasingly are proving to us the need to increase our resilience, and surely we could tap into that. Continued and increased health risks from air pollution, and that speaks for itself. And so therefore, what has delayed the transition? Because we already established that we've seen significant technological advancements throughout the last decades. There are a range of what we would consider disadvantages, or I would say sometimes even misconceptions. Range anxiety. So if I want to drive from Kingston to Portland, that's roughly 2.5 hours, can my electric vehicle go that distance? And if it can't, what convenience do I have along the way to be able to charge that vehicle, as I would be able to stop at the pumps and fill up with gas? And therefore, very closely linked to that is the lack of charging infrastructure. And in jurisdictions where the transition has been successful, I'm going to single out Barbados, one key factor is rolling out a charging infrastructure as your technologies are deployed. And so these must go hand in hand and be properly timed. Perhaps another deterrent is high upfront cost. I believe that is also tied into a lack of information for buyers. I mentioned not merely comparing the upfront cost of an ICE vehicle within the same class as an EV, but it is useful to conduct an analysis and look at your total cost of ownership. If I own both vehicles over 5 years, what is my total cost of ownership? Availability of maintenance services and the capacity associated with that. And even in some cases, we've seen an apprehension on the part of insurance companies and other related service providers to enter the space confidently. Users also complain that sometimes the electric vehicles are not as sexy as a vehicle within the same class, and as an ICE vehicle within the same class. So in terms of design and the availability of models and options for buyers, that has proven to be a deterrent. And therefore, to counter that, what can encourage the EV uptake? Surely on the government side, incentives for EVs and disincentives for ICE vehicles. I already mentioned, I'm going to again reiterate the importance of charging infrastructure networks to create that level of confidence among buyers and users. Providing the right information to buyers, and of course the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy Efficiency, the CCRE, is key to that. We have in fact put out a number of knowledge products and can be found on our website. Financing mechanisms, our financial institutions, how much are they on board? How comfortable are they to enter the space and to provide the right tools to support the transition? And of course, capacity building the capacity of our mechanics. So they have to also be a big part of the transition, and first responders in the case of unfortunate accidents. And as I end, I just wanted to touch too on the stakeholders. I know this would have been a separate presentation, but just to mention the transition cannot happen without all the players in the space coming together and acting collectively. So your utility companies, your government agencies, insurance agencies, the private sector. I mean, something as simple as thinking about business models for your gas station owners. If we have a high penetration of eMobility, what happens to the business for the gas station owner, and how can the gas station owner tap into these new opportunities? And so I definitely encourage dialogue, bringing together private sector, public sector players in the space. And to sum all of that up, I would say that there are 4 main classes of strategic initiatives required to charge ahead, including technology and infrastructure. And I believe UE has quite a bit of involvement in that area, grid integration studies, how do these technologies interact with our grid? Quite some opportunity there to do some research. We have finance and market development and innovation, policy and regulation, which we will hear about in a bit, and lastly, capacity development and awareness. And with that, I thank you for your attention. I do encourage you to visit us at www.c3, that's 2 C's, 1 R, EE.org. And if you go to our section on resources, you will see publications that have been made, including on battery technology related to e-mobility, for your perusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you found that insightful. What is meant by e-mobility? Further, the e-vehicles that we've been talking about, some of the economic considerations, the utility implications, how we may need to adapt services, the motivation for the Caribbean to transition, and then using EV as an approach to increasing resilience in the region. Thank you so much, Ms. Bodley. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we invite you to place your comments and questions in the chat, and we respond to them in the duration of the forum. Our second panelist will explore the policy framework of e-mobility. Dr. Zahra Oliphant holds a first degree in biochemistry and zoology, an MPhil in zoology and a PhD in zoology, with her area of specialization being freshwater ecology. And you may wonder, how did she get to EVs? With an extensive background in research, she entered the government service in 2016 as a Chief Research Officer in the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. In her capacity as head of the research unit, there was a report on electric vehicles in 2017, which was updated in 2018 and served as an early contributor to the discussions regarding e-mobility. Dr. Zarrow Oliver is currently the Acting Director of Corporate Planning and Performance Management. She has represented the Ministry at both regional and local forums regarding e-mobility and currently serves as a member of the EV Technical Working Group and the EV Council. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Oliphant.
Thank you for the introduction, Professor Stephenson. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to the University of the West Indies for putting this forum together and also for extending an invitation to the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. I represent our Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Carol Palmer, and I will be presenting on the policy framework for e-mobility. Okay, so introduction. The previous presenter really did a good job giving us an insight into what e-mobility is all about. And so I won't spend too long here, but just to state that electric mobility combined with renewable generation has arisen as one of the technological solutions with the most potential to reduce fossil fuel dependency within the transportation sector and to promote renewable energy resources penetration within the national energy mix. Electric mobility should be considered as a key driver in local and regional decarbonization and energy transition plans. Now, there are a number of factors that will enable electric mobility to emerge and succeed within a country, and it is the government's responsibility to create a policy framework to guarantee success. So all that the previous presenter spoke of, the government has to be integral in ensuring that if electric mobility is going to be a success in Jamaica, then we would have to set the policy framework to allow for that. Benefits of electric vehicles, as mentioned before. Environmental benefits, it's not something that we can overemphasize. Decrease the greenhouse gas emissions. The economical benefits, it was stated that the Caribbean will benefit from $2.2 billion worth of fuel savings over 20 years throughout the course of e-mobility. Also, happy consumers, lower maintenance of vehicles, savings in the pocket, don't have to deal with the rising fuel costs, and less noise pollution. Our roads are very noisy, so that has to be highlighted as another benefit. But I'm going to move straight into the importance of policy. Now, there are a number of countries, and one of the things that we have realized is the successful launch of eMobility. It is tied to a strong policy framework. It is tied to governments taking a stance. Some stances are very, very strict, very harsh. Some governments take a more relaxed, easing into stance. But the success of the eMobility in a particular country is paralleled by the kind of effort that happens at the policy level, policy and legislative level. So looking at lessons from our neighbor Barbados, and it was very, very good to see our previous presenter mention them, because they're really, really a good example. And there are a number of lessons that we can learn from Barbados. They were at the ECPA Ministerial in 2020. And these points are taken from the presentation that was done there. In 2020, there were 400 to 500 EVs in the island. For every EV imported in Barbados, the equivalent of the solar capacity needed to power the vehicle must be imported as well. So it goes hand in hand. It's not just to bring EVs in without giving consideration to renewable energy serving as a source of power for these vehicles. They have more than 40 charging stations across the country at multiple locations. Solar car parks are prevalent island-wide, and at least 1/3 of public buses are EVs. Now, Barbados has a target, very ambitious, very, what's the word here? It's a very strict target, 100% renewables by 2030. And that's part of the reason that even the importation of EVs, it goes hand in hand with the importation of solar capacity. And that's because they are really aiming to achieve this target. Their cabinet approved a policy for no further import of ICE, this is internal combustion engine vehicles, buses, for its public fleet as of March 1st, 2021. It excludes police cars and garbage trucks for the time being, but that shows the extent to which they are serious about getting EVs as the main vehicles in the island. They also started doing courses. Technical vocational institutions started doing courses in EV maintenance. So already the youth population is being trained on EV maintenance and all that is related to the standards and the safety of EVs. The government will soon also be setting a timeline for when ICE vehicles will be completely banned from the island of Barbados. So of course, Jamaica, being Jamaica, we have no intention of being left behind by our neighbors, by the world. And as a previous presenter said, we also want to avoid becoming a dumping ground for ICE vehicles. So what has happened in Jamaica? What has been happening? So research into best practices and the applicability of electric mobility in Jamaica began within the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology in 2017. By way of cabinet decision dated May 14, 2018, the ministry, MSET, received a mandate to develop an electric vehicle sub-policy. Now, arising out of this decision, the ministry then entered into an agreement with the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, in 2019 to develop a strategic framework for electric mobility, and the third draft of the framework has since been completed. The strategic framework for eMobility considers 4 scenarios, and the 4 scenarios are displayed on screen. Electrification of the private fleet. So this would be a few customers who are a little better off, I would say, and they import their EVs into the island, and the private fleet persons who can afford it, they go ahead, they're doing their thing. There's also another scenario, electric mobility for a small portion of the population. So a few more persons driving EVs, but the dominant vehicles that you're seeing are still ICE. Then another scenario contemplates early adopters among the public fleet. In this scenario, it would be the public transport system as the early adopters of EVs. And then scenario 4 is Jamaica goes electric. Unsurprisingly, the government is pursuing scenario 4, Jamaica goes electric. Now, what this contemplates under this scenario, the benefits are that the public transportation fleet takes the lead in electric vehicle acquisition, increasing its electric vehicle share. So this would be our JUTC, government entities investing in electric vehicles for their own transportation needs. And also if we could get the public passenger vehicles as well, becoming a part of this and investing in electric vehicles. And it would start off here. So 16% of the share of the public fleet is, the aim is to have at least 16% being electric vehicles by 2030. And then this would lead to the benefits being spread to the private fleet, to the regular consumers. And as they learn about it, as they see it, they see the leaders, taking charge, then there's interest, and it's contemplated that 12% of the share of the private fleet would be electric vehicles by 2030. And of course, the environmental benefits cannot be left out. E-mobility contributes to decarbonization of the transportation sector. Greenhouse gas emissions are reduced by 14% from the base scenario. So all of this is the aim on the scenario 4, Jamaica goes electric. And this is according to the strategic framework. So some key policy considerations for e-mobility in Jamaica: fiscal incentives, and this would include, so for example, persons would read about what's happening in other countries, so reduced registration, for example. So registration of electric vehicles would be less than registering a regular ICE. So as a previous presenter spoke about incentives for EVs and disincentives for ICEs, the fiscal incentives would include that. Incentives such as parking, free parking in certain areas, of course, imports, taxes, and duties. These are all parts of the considerations, the key policy considerations, and the strategic framework does have those areas outlined. Charging infrastructure, very critical, and not only the infrastructure, but the standards as well. The regulatory framework has to be set, the tariff mechanisms, the safety requirements for the vehicles, and to ensure that our frontline responders are well aware of how to respond to an electric vehicle versus an ICE vehicle, because they are different. So that's a very critical thing as well. Vehicle to grid, or as a presenter before said, vehicle to X, because there are so many different options. The impact on the existing grid, battery disposal or battery repurposing, renewable energy integration, and the training and public education. So these are some of the key considerations, and there are other policy considerations as well, because this is it's a very detailed, it's a very complex area to go into, e-mobility. And it is very important that the government considers all the different aspects. There may be need for sub-policies, there may be need for just one policy, but all of this is coming together, and it starts with the strategic framework. All right, so moving towards an EV policy. As I mentioned before, there was a report on electric vehicles, May 2017, and this has since been revised. The cabinet decision in May 2018, the strategic framework for e-mobility through the partnership with IDB that was developed in February 2020. And the EV Council was established in May 2021, had its first meeting on May 14th. Its next meeting is actually slated for tomorrow. And the OUR stakeholders consultation document, which the moderator referenced before, that document went out for consultation. The time period for receiving comments, I understand, has passed. And So that will lead to the regulatory framework. All right, so what are the next steps? So the next steps for the government, it's not the government's intention to just have everyone, going ahead and the government is running behind trying to catch up. So the next steps from the government side, MSET, is to finalize a fiscal policy related to the strategic framework. So all the fiscal incentives that are necessary to ensure that eMobility that we get to scenario 4, Jamaica goes electric. It's not something that can just be done without the necessary approval. And so at this time, MSET, along with the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Transport, in collaboration with the IDB, of course, is finalizing that fiscal policy now based on that, the final version of the strategic framework, because it forms part of the strategic framework. The final version of the strategic framework will then be presented to the cabinet for its approval. Also, arising out of the stakeholders' consultation regarding the regulatory framework for eMobility, the OUR will be taking into consideration all the comments received, and they'll be publishing an EV regulatory framework this summer. Upon cabinet approval of the strategic framework, what can happen now, because the strategic framework lists a number of action items with the different players, the key entities that will need to be involved in those action items. The Ministry of Transport, of course, being a very key player. So upon approval, the implementation of the actions from the strategic framework, we can start seeing that happen. And arising out of all of this and happening in tandem, putting things together from even as early as now, is the development of a comprehensive EV policy. So the EV council that has been established, it includes stakeholders, key players from both private and public sector. And it is that council that will give oversight, that will be reviewing documents, will be looking through, ensuring that the process of Jamaica going electric, that process goes as it intends to, so that the targets set for 2030 can be achieved. And with that, I thank you, and back over to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oliphant. And so Dr. Oliphant has just shared with us some of the players, some of the policy considerations, the goal for the public fleets and the private vehicles, the roadmap towards EV policy. And so it's a beautiful overview of where Jamaica is at with respect to the policy framework. And again, with your questions, we will explore those some more. And so our final presentation will examine infrastructure initiatives to support eMobility. We have with us this afternoon Mr. Richard Gordon, who comes to the table with a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the Kobe University in Japan, specializing in rotor dynamics. At the JPS, he has served in various capacities, including plant engineer, reliability engineer, project planning and development analyst for the Generation Expansion Division, manager for renewable energy systems, and now serves as the manager in the business development division. His working experience also includes a short stint as lecturer in the Faculty of Engineering and Computing at the University of Technology, Jamaica. His current project portfolio includes the development of photovoltaic systems, energy storage systems, and the electric vehicle charging network pilot project. He's fluent in English, Spanish, and Japanese, and is a member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers and a registered engineer with the Professional Engineers Registration Board. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So today I'm going to share with you, as we look at the infrastructure to support the eMobility ecosystem, as we like to call it, I'll share with you some information about the different aspects of infrastructure, the different types of infrastructure that are required, We'll look at different types of chargers, the different standards of chargers, even the location of chargers from an infrastructure point of view, and communication network to support the chargers and the use of the chargers. Just waiting on my slide to transition. All right, so JPS is involved, as you heard from previous presenters. There have been councils that have been formed for the development of policies and sub-policies. So JPS is active in that sphere with other major stakeholders in the private and public sector. We are active in that role, as some of you may even recall years ago when there was a large ban of an electric vehicle on the side of our head office. JPS has realized from then it was imminent, the development of the electric vehicle in Jamaica as a new mode of transportation. So with that, we have embarked upon and have received approval from the regulator, the Office of Utilities Regulation, for the execution of a $1.4 million project for the installation of EV charging infrastructure. The initial phase involves the rollout of 10 charging stations, which include 3 level 3s, and we'll go into a little bit later what's the difference between a level 2 versus a level 3. But for now, we'll just leave it as simple as that, to say 3 level 3s and 7 level 2 chargers to form an initial layout of a network across the island. So as I mentioned, we're actively involved in not only the electric vehicle charging infrastructure side of it, but also actively involved as one of the stakeholders as a utility in the policy development, as well as public education and the supply chain of vehicles. Because it's an entire ecosystem, and all different players in the system have to be communicating so that it evolves as best as it can for consumers and commuters. So in this electric vehicle ecosystem, there are different pillars. They range from, which I'll discuss on more today, the charging stations, but you'd have heard mention of the price of electric vehicles, range anxiety, the driving range of vehicles, the residual life of the battery, the ability to be able to sell the battery for it to be used for another purpose, and to have that fund to contribute towards replacement of a battery. That adds to the total cost of ownership, the total life cycle cost of an electric vehicle that users will take into consideration. Safety aspects in terms of first responders, getting persons to understand how they should react to arriving on a scene of an accident with an electric vehicle. And last but not least among the pillars, technical obsolescence. It's a rapid evolving technology. Persons may even recall if you bought a solar panel 5 years ago, sometimes it's a struggle even to find the same size panel now in 2021. The same is occurring with energy storage. There's a lot of investment, and it's rapidly changing the technology that over a relatively short period of time, we're likely to see fairly rapid change in technology before it really gets baked in and settles down. So today, I'm just going to go through, as I said, the infrastructure as relates to the chargers, the location, connecting into the grid as in the case of our system and the main power supply, the communication, and last but not least, what's known as the OCPP, the communication network to manage these charging stations, which are basically self-serving units. You operate them yourself as a user. All right, so let me so we'll touch briefly now on the type of chargers. Quite often in discussion around electric vehicles and chargers, when person asks, how long will it take to charge? How difficult is it to charge? Quite often what's forgotten is what we call the level 1 charger, the most basic of chargers. This is actually the charger you get with the vehicle, as an example is shown there in the picture. when you purchase an electric vehicle, you actually get a charger with it, which you're able to plug in at home. It resembles almost a large laptop charger. Those can be in the range of 1.4 kilowatt, relatively small, easy to use. On your initial charge, it will take quite some time to charge your battery. But users find that if you're driving, for example, from Kingston to Portmore and back daily, doing a 40-kilometer round trip a day, this charger will serve for your evening charge when you plug it in every night or every other night as you see fit, as enough to top up your vehicle to meet your needs of replenishing the energy of your vehicle on a daily basis. This is one of the major changes of this ecosystem, that as commuters and as users, we've become accustomed to over the last century that our access to refilling our vehicles, we have to go somewhere to get it, and always be concerned where is the next point that we can add fuel to our vehicle. But the primary means by which electric vehicle owners have been charging their vehicles is from charging at home. And if you're not charging at home, we all live within close proximity to a source of electricity. So persons who live in places like apartments, there's really just a matter of working out provisions for which persons in stratas and apartments can have access to charging infrastructure and through communication networks that they can use it. So there we have the level one. It's not a public charger, it's your own personal charger, but in the public charging space, what you typically see are what is known as level 2 and level 3. For the simplicity of it, as you may have guessed by now, as you get bigger in the number, the capacity and size of the charger, even its capacity increases. So a level 2 charger can range from as low as 7.2 kilowatt in capacity all the way up to 1920 kilowatt in capacity. And these just like your level 1 charger are delivering alternating current, which is electricity you find in our homes. Direct current, which we'll also speak about, is the electricity you find in your car battery, in the battery you have in your phone or your radio. So the electric vehicle uses direct current, but if you plug alternating current or AC current into it from a level 1 or a level 2 charger, the car can convert that electricity to direct current to charge its own battery. So it has an internal, what they call an OBC, onboard charger. So that's what the level 2 charger uses to charge your battery. And the difference you see on the images on the left and the right are chargers with 1 plug and chargers with 2 plugs. So they can vary depending on what's ideal for the location. And finally, the larger of the group, which is level 3, or for simple terms, level 3 chargers, which are primarily direct current chargers, or popularly known as DCFC, direct current fast charge. And as you may have guessed by now, these deliver primarily direct current directly into the battery. So they're able to deliver a lot more power, a lot more current, and deliver a faster charge. A simple fast charger, a 50 kilowatt charger, can be receiving up to 40 kilometers every 10 minutes, to put it in terms of what distance you can drive versus the time to charge. So it's very quick in terms of how much power you can push into a battery. And you may have also heard of things like Tesla superchargers that can go up to 350 kilowatts. So those are much more powerful chargers, able to deliver a lot more power, provided the grid can manage it and the vehicle can accept that much power. But all in all, these serve as the key chargers on the public network to allow persons to get quick charging. So you would have you would have seen an image with a charger having even 3 plugs, and you wonder why are there 3 plugs? Well, as the industry has evolved, there have been different standards. And as time goes on, we expect there to be consolidation, and it has started to occur. So I'll share with you what exists and the challenge that will face the policymakers and ourselves in narrowing it down, because it's an economic decision to try and narrow down on our own standards so that we don't have too many standards trying to match, and you end up spending a lot of money just having multiple plugs when you could have had multiple of the same plug, and several people can charge at the same time. So for example, in North America, they use what is known as the J1772. And the top row has the AC and the bottom row has the DC. So North America is dominated by the J1772, as well as Tesla has their own, to the extreme right, their own proprietary plug. And that's a whole different discussion as to why Tesla went ahead and just developed their own standard. Then in Japan, they adopted for AC chargers, they adopted the American standard. But within Japan, Tokyo Electric, a major utility in Japan, developed their own standard. And the reason was Tokyo Electric as a utility started to think ahead from the very beginning. How can a vehicle be connected to the grid and feed power back into the grid? So even before the vehicle-to-grid technology has gotten to the stage of widespread commercial adoption, Tokyo Electric as a utility went ahead and developed a standard, thinking ahead that this will eventually happen, and this is a standard that should be able to support it. A lot depends on how much that standard is adopted, or how other standards may adopt that type of technology. And then you have the European standard. You'll see the images above and below. What you're seeing above for the AC, you're seeing something similar below on what's known as a CCS2, Combined Charging Standard number 2. So that's basically the European standard. And finally, in China, they have what's known as a GBT standard. The AC plug, as you can see, is quite similar to the European. And they have their own DC plug, which is unique. In terms of consolidation, Europe has already declared that anything in Europe has to have CCS2. So even Tesla's supplied to Europe have to have that standard. We have seen movement from Nissan to go towards CCS2 and move away from CHAdeMO. So we're seeing some amount of consolidation around CCS2. So it's likely that you'll have CCS1, CCS2, and we'll wait to see what Tesla does, if they'll maintain their own or adopt one of those two. But as a country, the challenge exists for us in that, as it relates to used vehicles, we can almost import from anywhere in the world and import any standard into our country. Whilst because we drive on the left-hand side, the factories that our vehicles are likely to come from in terms of new vehicles would tend to be factories where European vehicles are made, and thus it would be easier for them to have the CCS2 standard. So it's to be seen how best policies can be worked out to support what may evolve in the near term in terms of used vehicle imports. And as time goes on, new vehicle imports that quite possibly will be on the CCS2 standard. All right, so just jumping now to site selection, and this forms part of infrastructure. It's a critical aspect for public charging. You heard me mention of the DC chargers, or the fast chargers. These are ideally placed close to highway networks. When our average commutes of 40 kilometers for the average person, charging at home or charging at work or in a public space using a level 2 is quite adequate. For some of the vehicles with smaller batteries, when you're on what we call leisure commute, then you need to get a fast charge along the way. And that's the purpose that DC chargers serve, to provide you a faster charge to fill your battery up so you can get to the end of your commute and back as you may need. Supporting that now are level 2 chargers, which are best placed at locations where persons will spend on average 30 to 60 minutes or plus of that, like a supermarket, a restaurant, where you go for entertainment, a bar, even your apartment at night. It's suited best for like a level 2. And it's what I would call an opportunity charge. Your primary objective is to sleep over the night in your apartment or to go shopping, and you're using that opportunity to charge your car as well. And obviously, as you would have figured by now, that the rate of charge is less, the cost less to install, but the rate of charge is less. It's a balance between the needs of a driver. Drivers need to have easy access to these chargers. They don't want to have to to risk getting into a location, similar to how you locate a gas station now. You want persons to have it very easy to get in and out, 24-hour access. Another key thing about electric vehicle charging stations is it's self-serve. We still have our gas stations that are not self-serve. We're accustomed to somebody pumping our fuel for us. The electric vehicle ecosystem is a self-serve system. So these areas need to be well lit, they need to be safe. The parking for EV should be reserved and accessible. If you go to a location and find it's very congested, even if you ask for the location to be reserved, you almost have to put a security guard standing over it to ensure that it's not used. So you have to look for locations that the EV parking will be respected, and as time goes on and the need for additional parking is required, that this can be accommodated. Because of the current time to charge vehicles, I mean, an average commuter will spend 15, 20, 25 minutes on a fast charger. They want to do other things, whether it's, have a rest stop, grab a quick snack, whatever the case may be, though the time passes very quickly. It's self-serve, so wheelchair access now becomes critical. The person who has a physical impediment now may stay in their vehicle to get their gas pump. They have to exit the vehicle to plug the charge point into the vehicle if there isn't anybody else to do it for them. Fortunately, there are other things you can simply do from your phone that assist them. And last but not least, location, ensuring that you don't have issues with poor drainage, etc. From the grid point side, or what's commonly referred to as the charge point operator. Charge point is an industry term for the plug, and the person who operates that charger, we refer to it as a charge point operator, in our case, JPS. It's critical that the grid actually have the capacity to meet the power demand of the charger in the immediate needs and the near future as these are expanded. Communication is a critical partner. The users need to use their smartphones. They have to have communication across a reliable network. You're doing a commercial transaction, so the communication needs to be reliable and secure. That charging station also has to receive and send communication about your charging that also needs to be reliable. So the evolution of the EV ecosystem and a lot of the developments that are to come on stream, communication is very important for these to be functional, for them to work in Jamaica. And last but not least, to the ease of accessing the grid. For example, going to a location and somebody says, well, you can put it all the way around the back. When you look at the distance to get from the grid to all the way around the back, you could have probably bought a few chargers with the cost that it takes to install it. So that's just a brief look at the infrastructure in terms of the charging stations, the standards that go with it, and where best to look at them. So I'll just go now into our own project and see some of what was done in our own project. So the concept behind this initial layout is to have level 3 DC fast chargers at critical points, in this case, Kingston, St. Anne, and Montego Bay, and then supporting level 2 chargers distributed around the island. Strategically located to ensure that there is worry-free transition around very hilly terrain. And when you get to areas that are a lot flatter, you find you can travel a lot further with an electric vehicle. So we're able to adjust the distance between electric vehicle charging stations based on that. Coupled with it is also the regulator aspect, which is that an electric tariff has been approved for public EV charging stations, and it's a time of use tariff, and that has been integrated into our charging stations via our network software provider, which in this case is an entity known as ChargeLab. And ChargeLab is basically also the name of an app that allows the user to interface with the charger, conduct their commercial transaction for JPS. So as I mentioned, the project entails 3 level 3 chargers, They're upgradable up to 150 kilowatt. So they're future-proof, for want of a better word, for what we see as for the next maybe 5 years, it's likely to come into the island. And then 3 level 2 11 kilowatt chargers and 4 level 2 7 kilowatt chargers. So today we have installed 3, one in Booth Service Station in St. Anne, and 2 others, one in Ironshore, which is another level 3, and one in Manor Park. Ironshore and Manor Park are just awaiting GI certificates before we commission and go live with those. Harborview is in design review, and that will be rolled out shortly, and Port Antonio has started construction. And we're finalizing contracts and 2 others and just going through some negotiations and 2 others. So you see images here from charging done in St. Anne with different types of units. To the left is the St. Anne unit, the drag salt unit at Booth Service Station after it's been wrapped. And in the middle, you can see what it looked like originally. And to the extreme right is Manor Park. As you can see, there's a distinct difference in size. AC, a level 2 charger is really just taking power from the grid and filtering it, powering it through switches and other security systems and safety systems. And in the case of our level 2 chargers, you're using dual plugs, which means you have 2 plugs on the unit of the same standard. Our level 3 chargers have 3 plugs. It actually has a 43 kilowatt AC plug on a McKenzie, which is a European standard. It has what's known as a chat demo, the Japanese standard, in the middle, which is also can be easily converted to Tesla through an adapter. And on the extreme right, we have CCS2, which is a European standard, which can be adapted to other standards such as CCS1 from the United States. So there you end up with 3 different plugs. But if we had somewhat gotten to the point of consolidating standards, we could probably have had 2 of the same standard and an AC plug to be able to serve more vehicles at the same time. It's a 93 kilowatt charger because the AC plug is 43 kilowatts, and either DC plug can push 50 kilowatts. They can share the 50 kilowatts at any given time. The others to come on stream are Harborview, Port Antonio, Clarendon Park. Those will come on stream very shortly. As I mentioned before, there's some that we're finalizing contracts and 2 that we have on a negotiation. A critical part of the whole infrastructure, and sometimes it's not persons are quite often not aware of it, other than just communication, is the network side of it. In our case, we chose to use an entity known as Charge Lab, which gives our users access to a North American network as well, through the use of the same app. So the user interface is primarily through an app, locating a charging station, finding directions to the charging station, finding the capacity of a charging station, if it's available or in use, or if it's down, initiating a charge, selecting your plug, knowing how much you have charged, stopping your charge, and then receipts are sent to you, you check on your accounts. All of that is done by an app. And you also have what's known an RFID card, which is basically an alternative that you use after having set up your account, that you can swipe by the charger, and that links to your account within the app. But all of that is done through the network service provider that links all these chargers and communicates with them and the users. Everything now is done through a phone and through a smartphone. So it's very critical for stable, reliable, secure communication from the user as well as to your network operator. And what does this infrastructure look like? Finally, as I mentioned, as you may have heard mentioned before also, is we selected to use what's known as an open charge point protocol. This is an open protocol, it's an open standard, and I can give an idea of the opposite. If we chose one that's closed, you couldn't communicate. It has its own private language, and anybody who doesn't have that type of network can't talk to it. an open charge point protocol, if you think of something like our own multi-link ATM network, where you can go to any multi-link ATM with your debit card, which you can think of it almost as if it's an RFID card, and access your account because it's an open network that allows you to link with the different banks. This is a similar type of protocol for the EV network. And we chose that network because we know that it's a type of network that can respond to rapid development that is going to occur within the EV network. Communication between the charging station, as I mentioned, and the network management system. That's done by service providers like Digital Flow, and we have our own JPS network that we do consider based on the location when we can, to see how best we can improve not only security but reliability and speed. And the same network, as you realize, also supports the user's communication back to that network management system and then back to the charger. So communication from network service provider is also key. And if you think of the other technologies that are likely to occur, you realize communication is very important. Driving a vehicle and letting go of a steering wheel, things like that, they don't happen unless you have very reliable communication systems. And then there's communication back to the network management system and the reliability of that system as well. So finally, this is a picture of from PlugShare. It's where users can go in and update information on where chargers are available and the types of chargers. So this is just a quick snapshot of where Jamaica is today. There are a few private chargers that are on it, as well as public chargers. And the two in brown are two DC fast chargers, one in Jackshall and the one that has been installed in Ironshore. So we see this as just the initial layout of the EV ecosystem from the charging network point of view. And as this ecosystem develops and evolves, we expect that all aspects of it will develop and evolve as time goes on. Location, charger technology, grid, third-party communication, and network communication. That's the ecosystem of the charging infrastructure. All right, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I think we all have a greater appreciation for some of the plans and status of rollout of the JPS with respect to charging stations, the types of chargers, and some of the standards governing charging options, and how these may impact on vehicle imports. We heard of site selection considerations, and it gives us a greater appreciation of the connectivity issues that Ms. Bodley spoke of earlier. Thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. So as we transition, ladies and gentlemen, to our question and answer, I want to acknowledge that we have some colleagues from the Jamaican German Automotive School, and we just want to invite their comments as we begin our question and answer segment, to just ask them to tell us a little about what are the training imperatives, what are the training plans to support EV rollout in Jamaica. Mr. Levy or Mr. Henry, could you go ahead?
Hi, good evening, everybody. It's Ian Levy. I am currently the manager at the Jamaica German Automotive School. One of the things that we're currently looking at is how we go about training the future workforce that is going to be required, the future technicians that are going to be required for the industry. And at the moment, it's in its early stages, because we're yet to find out what sort of support with regards to the infrastructure is going to be available. But also we're looking into talking to the main manufacturers about the technology that is available on each of these vehicles. On the whole, they're very, very similar with subtle differences. So training should not be too much of a problem. The only thing that we need is to have the commitment from the manufacturers to allow some of our instructors to have access to the technology so that we can deliver it. So with that in mind, we're partnering, we're looking to partner with some of the major manufacturers with regards to putting together a curriculum, a suitable curriculum that will enable us to put the course together. But also with an extension to that, we would be looking to train people such as the fire services, because often, well, I hope it doesn't happen too often, but sometimes people do get into accidents. And working overseas, I have been involved with helping to train some firefighters or bring about an awareness to firefighters about how to deal with an electric vehicle in an accident. So those are some of the sort of spin-offs that we're looking to engage the fire services and the police with regards to the safety surrounding electric vehicles. But on the whole, the main crux of it is just getting together with the main dealers, coming up with the necessary background knowledge that is needed, train our instructors to be able to deliver the necessary courses that will then give the necessary qualification so that we can have a good workforce in the future, which is definitely going to be required in the industry in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much, Mr. Levy. And I'm sure there are a number of institutions waiting to partner with the JAGAS as you outline a direction for the training initiatives. Dr. Oliphant, we have a question from the chat. Are there plans to change the legislative framework to allow for direct use of renewable energy from public charging stations, since the power will have to be sold to JPS first?
Okay, thank you for the question. I know that there are actually several questions and I listed them down, but this is actually a key point that is being considered by the OUR. So what I had mentioned in my presentation with regard to the regulatory framework, this is a very key point. And when the regulatory framework is published, it will address this and what exactly will take place to ensure that that there are no prohibitive factors that would preventing e-mobility from rolling out in Jamaica.
Okay, thank you so much, Doc. Doc, to you again. Can anyone
Yes.
What is that current duty regime in regard to importation of EVs? I'm not sure if you want to take that one, Doc.
Well, yes, I can. So I'll pair it with another question that I saw later on, asking if there is GCT on electric vehicles. So there's currently an import duty of 20% for hybrid electric vehicles and 30% for battery electric vehicles. Now, the import duty is also an area that the fiscal incentives being developed will seek to address. And with regard to the GCT, there is no GCT for electric vehicles. However, on hybrid vehicles, it is 15%.
Okay, Doc. Okay. I wondered if we could bring in Ms. Charlin Bodley. Ms. Bodley, you had in your presentation started speaking to some of the players in the market that would be important for EV to be successful in Jamaica, and I imagine in the region. Could you highlight that some more for us, please?
Sure, and I think I also saw a question in the chat concerning what we were doing on the CARICOM level. So I will say on the regional level, as a regional stakeholder, how we're driving that our primary efforts are in the development of what we call the REVs, which is our regional electric vehicle strategy. The CCRE would have developed the framework for that strategy, and the strategy is nearing the end of its development and would then be presented and shared with our member states. In addition, we are also designing and implementing a number of projects and interventions. And I, even in my presentation, I had intended to mention that while we speak solely on land transport, e-mobility does extend to other forms of transportation. So marine transport is something that we need to look at. We're tourism destinations in the Caribbean, and we need to look at how we incorporate that into sea transportation as well. So we do have a few projects in the pipeline that will look at green ports and how we can green our ports to prepare for electric mobility extending to sea transport. In terms of your players on a national scale, I think that's a bit clear given the panel and the constitution of the panel today. So your Ministry of Energy, and I see the questions coming fast and furious at Dr. Oliphant. Everybody wants to know what government will do, what government is doing, what direction the government will take. So that's obviously, I think, one of the most obvious answers. The government and its policy development efforts will be important in driving. The utility, again, with Mr. Gordon's presentation, we see so many layers and so much work even for the utilities, your communications, your telecommunications agencies. On the private sector side, I think it's also very important to include the private sector in that discussion. We see in Barbados that market is primarily driven, along with the efforts of the government. You have so much work being done by the private sector. Even the charging infrastructure that would have been rolled out was a huge private sector investment. Your financial institutions, insurance agencies, education agencies, also on the CCRI, we, through our capacity building and knowledge management work program areas, we have conducted our first electric vehicle train the trainer course that was through collaboration with Fanshawe University out of Canada. And we've just launched our CARICOM Energy Knowledge Hub. And I'm mentioning that because the training materials would have been imported into our CARICOM Energy Knowledge Hub so that anybody who have missed the training could catch on and have a look at the video. So our universities and even the private sector, we just heard from Mr. Levy, I believe, the role of private sector agencies, even in building capacity.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bodley. And I have another one for you, and I think Mr. Gordon. When do you expect V2G? You're going to have to remind us what we mean by V2G. Do you expect V2G to become a reality? And will the grid be smart enough to take advantage? So I anticipate Mr. Gordon will need to weigh in. You want to start us off, Ms. Bodley?
I'll give the simple answer. I think it cannot happen in isolation, that a number of moving parts need to come together. In terms of when that happens in Jamaica, Mr. Gordon, over to you.
Remind us what V2G means. Remember, for our audience, please.
Sure. V2G means vehicle to grid. So to give an idea, let's say your home, you're consuming 300 kilowatt hours a month. You may, if you're looking at, for example, a solar system, you may be interested in a 6 kilowatt hour battery. Or if your home consumes more, you might be contemplating a 12 kilowatt hour battery. But parked outside in the garage is a car with a 45 to a 75 kilowatt hour battery. So vehicle to grid is a technology that allows you to harness the battery from the car to use it to potentially supply a home and even onto the grid. So the technology exists, but like many things, it's really a matter of cost. So the manufacturers of electric vehicles, they are highly involved along with battery technology manufacturers in developing that technology, battery technology, to bring it to a lower cost. So I think the manufacturers, it's not the major focus at the moment. In some cases, they have partnered with other entities for them to develop that technology in parallel. But like any business, they not only want to develop technology, but they want to know how they can benefit from it other than just selling. So in summary, the vehicle manufacturers, it's not their major focus right now. I would suspect maybe in the next 5 to 6 years, if once battery technology has stabilized, that those technologies such as vehicle to grid, V2G, will start to evolve more, and those entities that have been working on the technology in parallel with the battery manufacturers, because they need their proprietary information, that hopefully by then they will have matured with the technology and been able to produce at a lower cost, that becomes a reality. In terms of the grid being ready for it, the utility has basically lays the groundwork for a lot of the developments that are likely to happen over the next, let's say, 10 to 15 years. A lot of it will occur on the distribution network. We're already able to respond to what happens on the transmission network in terms of solar farms, wind farms. So we're basically positioning ourselves in terms of making sure that our software can easily be upgraded to access all of these different iterations of technologies that will come onto the distribution network. Where there's different variations of services that energy storage can offer, as well as electric vehicle, which is really an energy storage device on wheels.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Gordon, we want to field two more by you before we head back to policy. Can you speak to plans by JPS to integrate renewable energies as that power source for a charging station? And can you speak to, will JPS be committed to power some of the, okay, we just dealt with renewables. Can private charging stations be integrated into the JPS system?
Okay, let me take the first one, which is renewables.
Yes.
So from a macro scale, powering a charging station connected to the grid, one of the reasons for the push for electrification of transportation, especially private vehicles, is that it should be able to foster increased penetration of renewables. There are other things that need to be involved, but that's the thinking, that you can increase the penetration of renewables, especially large-scale renewables. So yes, that is possible, and it's already occurring as the government sends out requests or proposals for the development of more renewable plants. Once those are brought on, they're integrated into the grid, then it becomes part of the entire network, the entire ecosystem, and it becomes part of the entire supply, whether it is into your home or into a vehicle. On a charger by charger basis, I think that is part of the policy that is still being worked out. There already exists the net billing and also the connection, let's call it framework. As it now relates to electric vehicles, I think that is part of some of the policy discussions that are currently ongoing. Can private commercial operators install electric vehicle chargers? Yes, you can install your electric vehicle charger. What obtains in Jamaica is that our laws basically state that one entity is allowed to sell electricity. So the key thing is the sale of electricity. Okay. So installing charging stations, some persons have already done, you put up at a supermarket or the restaurant, they're able to install a charging station, but the sale of electricity still remains within the remit of the utility.
Thanks so much, Mr. Gordon. A quick one for you. Will Negril come on board in the charging stations? I imagine whether Negril is in the early plans in rollout. We're working on it. We're waiting on some feedback to finalize that location. Getting into the heart of Negril has been a challenge, so we'll have to be a little bit outside of Negril, but we can't go too far because, as I said, if you have the grid, you still need to have good communication. So it's something that we hope to have nailed down within the next 2 weeks. And then from there, it will take another 3 weeks to get it deployed. Thanks so much, sir. Yeah. Go ahead, Sir Gordon.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Sir Gordon. Doc, we're coming back to you. Quick one. Will the government incentives on the cost of vehicles? Any knowledge of early plans towards incentives?
Well, so incentive really cost of the vehicles. Yeah. Right. So the fiscal incentives will affect the overall cost of vehicles, particularly related to import duties and the total cost of ownership, which would take into account like registration and licensing incentives and parking incentives and the whole area that is being looked at. However, I'm not sure if the person means the cost at the dealer itself. That would be under the remit of the dealer. So if the dealership is selling the car at whatever cost, I'm not really seeing the government interfering with that. However, the cost of the total cost of the vehicle itself would be affected by any incentive that the government gives to get the vehicle into the country. And then there is the incentives that would relate to total cost of ownership.
Okay, Doc. Is the government going to wait until 2027, Doc, when the JP is up to review before amending the conditions regarding supplying electricity?
Right, and the person followed up with, since this will prevent public from benefiting directly from any RE charging stations that the private sector builds. And not at all. That's not the government's intention. Matter of fact, the Electricity Act is currently being reviewed and is before a Joint Select Committee of Parliament. This is actually an area that the Joint Select Committee is discussing. It's at the stage now where presentations are being made from the private sector, and anyone that wants to tune into that can tune in via PBC Jamaica. And as I mentioned before, it's really not the government's intention to in any way cripple the integration of EVs into the market. So as it relates to the public benefiting from RE charging stations built by the private sector, the OUR regulatory framework is taking that matter into account. So that is due to be published this summer. They've already closed off, I believe, the time to receive comments, and it's now to address these comments, look at everything, and to publish a regulatory framework. And this is a particular area that was put to stakeholders in the consultation process because they are working on ensuring that there is no prohibition from the government side that will affect the launching of, well, it's already here, the full integration of EVs into the market.
Okay, Doc. Doc, a quick one. How are they considered in the policy dialogue that's on?
Well, in terms of rolling on EVs, it considers a lot of stakeholders. Basically, the entire government is involved in this, and BSJ is no exception. They are involved in the process, they're involved in the dialogue, so they're also at the table and taking part.
Okay, thank you so much, Doc. And
you're welcome.
For our panelists, as universities and tertiary institutions across the region, research comes to mind, and we wondered, have we considered what are some of the research questions or research needs that tertiary educational institutions could support as Jamaica rolls out EVs? Any one of our panelists?
If I can, I think any country has to roll out its own map based on its own challenges. And I think as a nation, one of our challenges is we want to have, even if we're physically small in size, we want to have a lower cost of energy. New technologies emerge, and there's always a delicate balance between the integration of new technologies whilst at the same time driving down energy costs. Whenever you have to buy something, you have to go to a bank and borrow money for it. There's always a cost out of it. So I think there's work being done by the regulator in terms of laying out these maps. So I think one of the areas that also universities can do is look at research to see how best technologies, evaluate roadmaps in terms of how different technologies are rolled out and their suitability and how best we can tweak it at the micro level in our societies. Because sometimes our policies look at a much higher level, but sometimes the devil is in the micro details to see how best different technologies can be rolled out for different sectors of our economy to get the objectives that we want as a nation. That's just my initial thoughts.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. Pausing if any other panelists wants to weigh in.
Yes, I'd like to weigh in. Just recalling an example from Barbados, where the technical vocational institutions, they started courses in EV maintenance to develop a new skill set. So one of the challenges that they issued to the institution was for them to come up with a development for conversion from ICT to EVs. So in that way, that would challenge the minds of the young researchers. So maybe not necessarily that, but there might be other aspects of EV technologies that can be explored, and they can develop, they can create models, because if they can work on something like that, converting ICE to EVs, and that can be projects within the university, then that would have implications, of course, for the entire nation. So it's a very critical, as a researcher, it's a very critical area. And if we can get to researchers and these young, brilliant minds, there's so much going on in their minds as they read, as they expand, that we don't even know about. So if we can really find a way to integrate that and have that dialogue, then I'm sure that the entire nation would benefit from it.
Thank you so much, Doc. Mr. Levy, I'm not sure if Mr. Levy is still with us, or Mr. Henry. Can you just remind us of maybe some of the next steps that JAGAS has identified in terms of scoping out possible training courses to support EV rollout? What are the next steps, and what are possible timelines that may be guiding the JAGAS right now?
Well, sorry, go on.
Go ahead, Mr. Levy.
No, sorry, Ms. Irie, I didn't know you were here. No, you please go ahead.
Yeah, I just got back from the other meeting.
Oh, okay.
What happens is that JAGAS has been looking at EV vehicles over the past few years, because we recognize the growth of the industry. And we recognize also that it is something that is coming, and it is growing within the Jamaican society. So we have been looking at it. But what we have done is that we have concentrated with the hybrid vehicles. And we have been doing training with the use of hybrid vehicles over the last few years. However, the introduction of straight EV vehicle is something that we have been considering. However, we have not yet gone into it, because the technology has to be exposed. Well, the institution has to be fully exposed to the technology in order for us to, in turn, expose it to our trainees. And
Right.
Unfortunately, the automotive industry tends to be a little bit close-fisted when it comes to exposing information to the training sector, in order that the information can be spread openly to all the trainees and to all those that are in need of training as it relates to that type of knowledge within Jamaica.
Okay, sir. Thank you for that intervention. Ms. Bodley, so looks like you may want to weigh.
Yeah, I wanted to add to some of the areas that come to mind, and there are many. So I would say it's important for science to meet economics. So on a macro level, it would be good to have some research done in the Jamaican context, in the Caribbean context, on the revenue that government may forfeit introducing electric vehicles. It's one of the responses that we get, or one of the concerns that are expressed to us by government agencies, because at present there is a revenue generating stream from ICE vehicles. I also want to encourage that forward thinking to extending e-mobility to our waters, so ocean technologies, how our ports need to respond to that growing need. And I'm sure it sounds like JPS has it figured out, but on a Caribbean level, perhaps grid integration studies studies that would be able to guide our utility companies as they participate in the transition.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Bodley. We have a question for you, Ms. Bodley, while you have the floor. Impressive work being done by SICRE. Would your organization support a regional standard for charging? We heard about standards.
Awesome question.
Yes.
All considered under our regional electric vehicle strategy, the REVs. Excited when that work is done to be able to share that with our Caribbean region. In terms of the development of standards, I think that's an awesome idea. Very useful. We tend to simply adopt, although I believe the electric vehicle technologies are so mature though. What I would say is we would be able to provide significant technical input and work alongside CrossQ. So CrossQ is another CARICOM institution responsible for standards and quality. And so something like that would have to be done in collaboration with CrossQ, like we've done for energy efficiency. So there are energy efficiency standards, building codes, etc., to include all of that. And so definitely with a push to QI, quality infrastructure, SICRE would definitely look at that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bodley. All right, 2 more questions, colleagues, and then I'm going to invite each of our panelists just to give us a closing statement that you'd love our audience to leave with as we close out the discussion on EVs. We have one, Mr. Gordon, asking, why is JPS only installing 3 DC fast chargers?
So the initial phase of our project had a budget cap of about $500,000 US. So based on our initial estimates, we fit as many level 3 chargers as we could, whilst at the same time allowing for enough level 2 chargers to provide the presence of a network. If we did it all level 2s, we'd have a greater visibility of our network, but a critical part of our network, even one as basic as this one is the level 3 charging. So we first made sure we had provision for level 3 chargers and basically filled out the rest of the budget to create an initial network with level 2 chargers. As we go on looking at other phases, it's quite possible that there will be a greater focus on level 3 chargers. There's a lot of development occurring along the South Coast, so we have to match that as well in terms of movement of electric vehicles, and as we deploy electric vehicle chargers, where persons will travel and where persons are likely to buy electric vehicles. So it's a balancing act in terms of making that investment as this ecosystem evolves. But naturally, as it grows, the number of public chargers will expand exponentially.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. Dr. Oliphant, we have one speaking to the repurposing. Any forward planning in the framework for repurposing of private and public vehicles, batteries for grid or residential storage after these batteries pass their end of life for favorable operation? Not sure if you can speak to anything in the framework right now that deals with repurposing of batteries.
Well, it is certainly a key policy consideration, and that's something that's being discussed because a comprehensive EV policy would need to address that. What we can't have, it would be an environmental nightmare if used batteries, there's no provisions made for their disposal or their repurposing. So it is definitely a key policy consideration, and there are plans being made for how this will be addressed. So yes, there is forward planning in this regard.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Oliphant. With that,
welcome.
I'm going to invite final comments. I want to invite Ms. Bodley. Would you go ahead? Any final comments for the audience to consider as we close?
Thanks, and it's been such a pleasure being here and being part of this conversation. So extending my thanks on behalf of the SICRE for inviting us to speak. I just wanted to add to the research areas, the health sector and the impact on health with that technology transition. That's also a key area for research. My final parting words at this point will just be some encouraging words to Jamaica, to the rest of our region, to really engage in a multi-sectoral approach to this transition. I know sometimes it seems that the odds are against us. There are a number of disadvantages and a number of hurdles that we have to cross over, but we do not want to be stuck in a few decades or even shorter time, being left behind as the rest of the world transitions. I think that that's really key for me. We have seen ourselves or typically operated as technology importers, and I think we have the brain power, we have the capacity to be able to innovate within that space, and be it that innovation means how our moving parts, how these elements, we can bring them together to make the transition successful. So that is my challenge for us, Caribbean people, for you, talented Jamaicans, to each, contribute and be part of that transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Bodley. Dr. Oliphant?
Yes, thank you also for the invitation to the ministry. It was good to be here, and it was good to also hear the other presentations. Well, let me just, in closing comments, I do notice that there were 2 questions that didn't get a chance to be answered. Someone asked about removing the age limit on EVs. I'll quickly state that with EVs, because batteries lose capacity with age, this would need some careful consideration, because importing an old EV and then having to change a battery after a few years' time, the batteries are very expensive, and that's part of the reason that EVs are still very expensive. However, the cost of batteries have been improving over time. And so I just wanted to make sure I address that. But in closing, I would say that I know the perception of the public is always that, government is slow, government isn't doing anything, but we are doing things. We are working towards it. Of course, it's not as fast as persons would desire it to be, but what we are working to ensure is that we get it done right, correctly. The public benefits, the environment benefits, and everyone benefits. And so as we look to finalize, as we look to have the strategic framework approved by Cabinet, to see the published regulatory framework from the OUR, this is literally the launching pad. And the EV Council, again, it's already there, already set up. This is a launching pad for us to now start really pressing on that gas and moving forward as we integrate EVs into our transportation system. So yes, it might have been a slow start, but we're getting there. And the support of the public, the understanding of the public about this particular technology is also a key area that the government will need to boost that public education campaign, also boost the training to ensure that we don't just have these EVs and the training capacity isn't there to maintain it. So there's a lot that needs to be done. And because there's so much to be done, it's not pleasing to some persons, the time period is taking, but we're doing our best to ensure that this is done correctly and launched, and the integration happens as quickly as is possible. So I thank the public for your patience and for the support that you give to the government in this regard. And we welcome any comment, suggestion. Feel free to visit the MSET website to contact us as we continue to do our best in this regard. So thank you again, Yui, and my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oliphant. Mr. Gordon.
Yes, thank you for having me, for being able to, share a few minutes with yourself and the listeners on the panel. Just want to say, and to endorse what has been said before, is that we're going through a critical stage now of consultation, getting feedback from different stakeholders. I encourage persons to participate, try not to stay outside and critique alone, but participate, try and understand the reasons for different opinions from the different parties, even if they have their own biases. And because I think it is through consultation that as a nation we have been able to develop world-leading systems that have worked very well for us. And that's the goal that I believe we want to achieve in this case, as we seek to what I would call reintroduce electric transportation. We're coming from this over a century ago. We just happen to be going back there to save our planet. So I encourage everyone to not only participate, but give a good listening ear, and understand the different opinions. And that's how I believe we can grow going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Gordon. Thank you. Mr. Levy or Mr. Henry?
Thanks once again for inviting me. I must say it's exciting. It's an exciting time where automotives are concerned with regards to the industry's part in the sort of electric technology era, and I find it very poetic that Dr. Oliphant mentioned pressing on the gas. I'd like to let you know that electric vehicles and some of the major motor vehicle manufacturers are now involved in racing at a very high level with electric vehicles. There's actually an electric race series that is now running alongside the Formula One series. So that shows you the level to which this has gone. And I think that going forward here in Jamaica in its infancy, we will have to look more at partnerships rather than working in isolation. So with regards to the training where we're concerned, we're looking at it from the point of view that we're sort of preparing the future technicians, and we can't do that in isolation without us being partnered with the people who have the know-how and the technology, either local or wider afield. So with that in mind, I do hope that not in the not too distant future, we could partner with some of the very people on the panel here with regards to how we can go about creating content or more advanced content for the various levels of the courses that we intend to offer. And thank you once again for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Levy, for those comments. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found the session useful this afternoon and thought-provoking. Allow me to thank the panelists on our behalf, Ms. Charlin Bodley, Dr. Zahra Oliphant, Mr. Richard Gordon, Mr. Ian Levy, and Mr. Clifton Henry. Thank you so much for the insights that you have shared with us. And it is our hope that as we move forward with eMobility for Jamaica, that these partnerships, as Mr. Levy has indicated, will continue. Allow me to thank very especially the organizers of the forum, Drs. Andre Coy, Louis Harris, and Mrs. Terry-Ann Collins Frey from the Faculty of Science and Technology, and Dr. Omar Thomas from the Faculty of Engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in the proceedings this afternoon. We invite you to share the YouTube link with colleagues and to visit the Faculty of Science and Technology and the Faculty of Engineering's online platforms, website, Facebook, Instagram pages for upcoming events. Again, our sincerest thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Have a beautiful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.